Okay, I'm going to start out reading a poem from Charles Bukowski. I've kind of revisited Bukowski lately. I kind of got off of him because he's so raw a lot of times, and it can make a person uncomfortable. But he also is able to cook those raw stories and poems into some very beautiful things sometimes. So I'm going to start with this because I kind of came of age as a solo artist in San Francisco. I'm going to read this poem of his called The 60s, and that's when I was there, and 70s. I don't remember much about them, except you look and some guy might be wearing a headdress of Indian feathers. Everybody was covered with beads and passing joints. They stretched around on comfortable rugs and didn't do anything. I don't know how they made the rent. The woman I was living with was always telling me, "I'm going to a love-in. Or, "We made the cops smile. I gave one a flower." I seemed to be the only person with an 8-hour job, and there were always people coming through the door and raiding my refrigerator for food and beer. "We share," the woman I lived with told me, "we share our love." A guy would stick his face into mine, drunk on my beer, and he'd scream, "You ought to see the yellow submarine." "What's that?" I asked. "The Beatles, man, the Beatles." I thought he meant, the bug beetles. Then there was somebody called Wavy Gravy. They even talked me into going on an LSD trip. I found it so stupid. "You fail," they told me. "You fail, you didn't open up." "Peace, peace," I said. Then, I don't know, all at once the 60s seemed to be over. And almost everybody vanished just like that. You'd see a few leftovers now and then down on Venice Beach, standing around on corners, sitting on benches, looking really washed out with very vacant stares, somehow astonished at the turn of events. They slept in cars, stole what they could, and demanded handouts. I don't know where all the others went. I think they got suits and ties and went looking for an 8-hour job. The 70s had arrived, and that's when I dropped out. I had the whole place all to myself. And I want to read one little piece from my book called Critical Art Theory. That's sort of some of the insights I've had, some of my inspiring things that have inspired me, and a few tricks of the trade that I was able to wrestle to the ground. But one of my tips on painting is have an attitude towards wasting art materials. For his birthday, I gave Reed, my 13-year-old grandson, a fancy wooden kit loaded with colored pencils, chalks, and oil sticks fanned out like rainbows. The next time we met, I asked him to bring the box. We got down to work, and his little sister asked if she could use some of his colors. He reluctantly agreed, then instructed her to keep each color in order. He monitored her technique, cautioning her not to bear down too hard. It dulls the point and uses up too much of the pencil. I didn't say anything to that. I wanted to find a way to break the news to Reed, but it wasn't the time or place. I set him up in a way by giving him the nifty kit. In hindsight, I should have delivered bulk art materials in a paper bag. Then wasting them would have been a comfortable option.
I want to start by asking you about the Bukowski poem that you just read. And I'm taking from that you read it because that was, as you said, that was the scene that you came of age in.
Yeah.
And what was that like for you as an artist? What part of that scene was forming you as an artist?
Well, I was coming out of old dark Arkansas, and so the ebullience and brilliance and excitement in the Bay Area in the mid-'60s was pretty stimulating for a 25-year-old guy. And so, you know, you had the beatniks and the B-ends, and Bukowski wasn't actually part of that scene, but I did catch a reading at the some high school gymnasium in San Francisco. True to form, they had a little refrigerator on stage and a chair, and he got up on stage and he opened the door and he got a beer and he drank it, and then he read a poem, and then he opened the door and it was all different beers I noticed, and he drank it and he read another poem, maybe another short poem, and he did that all the way through. So he was really true to form. He was very shy about reading, actually.
And is any of your work on the walls here from that period?
Yes, this, it's not on the walls, but this sculpture with the lettering Moki was from that period. And actually, I let the whole thing kind of fall apart. He was missing an arm and a hand and some toes and some frets on his guitar, and he was not on a bass. He was just kind of leaning against the wall up in the, and I spent, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks recently. I mean, I just finished this project of restoring him, resurrection of my great friend McKelvey. So that's kind of the 60s resurrected for me.
That's great.
I know I'd come home and tell Deborah, I'd say, Deborah, I made a finger today. It's like, I couldn't believe how hard making that left hand that's on the guitar, how difficult it was. But anyway, that was actually made in the 60s and restored just recently.
And this color range, I mean, you talk about exuberance in the 60s, and it seems like that still epitomizes your work. There's an exuberance in your color and in your experimentation. How do you think about how your work has changed since the 60s, and where does that continue to inform who you are now?
Well, it's been nothing but change.
No.
My whole life, even before the 60s. You know, that just seems to be what I do. I get a bee in my bonnet, or what I might call one of my new bad ideas, you know, and if it's bad enough, you know, it might take me a couple of years, you know, and I might come back to it later, but I change all the time.
And when you say you came out of dark Arkansas, what was your art life like then? Were you making art as a kid?
As a kid, and had a studio in Arkansas before moving to the Bay Area. The work that was immediately preceding the Bay Area in Arkansas was really dark. It was very expressionistic and angry and kind of trying to break out of that old dark Arkansas mood, which is very oppressive. For a long time when I was in the Bay Area, I had work in Arkansas, and I was going back and forth maybe once a month, and the mood is so different. I would walk on the streets of Little Rock and think, gosh, what is it? What is it that's kind of, the atmosphere is sort of pink and muggy, and you know, you go to the Bay Area and it's blue and crisp. Yeah.
Okay, so geography has been really important, and like psychic geography has been really important in your work. Would you say that?
Yes, I would. It was not just geography, it was the times.
Yeah.
You know, that when I moved to the Bay Area. That's when I'd see a knock-kneed kid on a bicycle, and I'd think, oh, what a life, and I'd go make a sculpture, you know.
Then tell me, where does Galisteo fit into that? Like, when did you come, and how did that affect your work? So
Before we moved to Galisteo, we used to live on Old Santa Fe Trail, and then we bought this property and built a studio, and then we kind of fell in love with Galisteo and moved out there. But I don't know how Galisteo has affected my work. I have done quite a few New Mexican landscapes, but even New Mexico, all of the 90s I was doing portraits. Mm-hmm. And I had a studio right across from Site Santa Fe in the rail yard. Uh-huh. And so that really got me involved with the arts of New Mexico. I would say more than the landscape.
And so the people of New Mexico?
Yeah, and not only just New Mexico, just people that were cycling through, people that were, you know, showing at site, or theater people.
So this is when you did this whole improvisational happening, in a way. Was mm-hmm. that where people would just come in and you'd paint them? What was it?
Paint them.
Paint them.
Yeah, it just started out as kind of a need to talk about art. That's the way it all started, because I found that a lot of the artists I met, because I'd been showing in Santa Fe for 5 years before we moved here, and I met a bunch of artists, but I found that I had a hard time getting much of a conversation. It was like you bring up some artists, well, I don't like them, I don't like them. Well, I don't like them either, but I want to talk about them, you know, that sort of thing. Or, you know, so I set up this idea of a portrait session in my studio. And then I was painting somebody's portrait, and he invited some of his friends by. And then that became the format. Start a portrait, bring your own bottle, and bring your friends at 4 o'clock, and I'll be into the portrait, and we'll, you know, and so that's the way it kind of evolved.
And then would you direct the conversation? Is that, were you
the only direction I gave the conversation was that don't talk about what I'm painting. You can, don't, you know, and I was pretty adamant about that, because I just wanted to paint freely. It wasn't about a portrait, really. It was just a painting, you know.
Did you keep the work, or did people take it home afterwards?
I had the work.
And so then that desire to talk about art, that seems to connect to your desire to write about art. What inspired you to do the books that you did?
It's a way of documenting my own work. You know, I had a big website for years, and I think it was counterproductive. I remember going to Seattle, and I'd met an artist in Ireland when I had a residency there, and he was a Seattle artist, and he'd take me around and introduce me to galleries. and they'd go to the computer. What's your website? You know, and my website had so much work on it that I could see this on people. They click around, and look at all these different folders, the different periods of my work, and they don't know who the real Pat McFarlin is, and they get confused.
So, and that really does distinguish you as an artist, it seems to me, that sheer abundance and exuberance of direction that you move in. And yet at the same time, as I was looking around, I was thinking that there's a continuity of color. There's a depth and intensity and of both color and whimsy and politics, and social statement. Like, there is something very distinct that's your work. But how do you make your choices around what direction, how you want to express it, in which medium you want to work? Because it seems that you work in sculpture, both in wood and clay, and in 2D and installation.
You know, I think the idea dictates the medium, or, you know.
What form does the idea come in? How do you think?
I would say mainly from drawings. For instance, my portrait of Freud actually was one painting that had a title along with the concept of, and the title being Freud Hits the Jackpot. I wanted to, you know, have this grouchy old guy having the jackpot deliver all these cherries. And then Deborah, there was spring or this time of year or early summer, and she brought me some cherries from the farmer's market. And I thought, wow. And that's when I started doing the still lines of cherries. So it's just like one thing leads to another, is all I'm saying.
So when the jackpot are cherries, the inspiration for that was actual cherries, not the symbol of cherries.
No, the inspiration was, you know, no, it was Deborah that brought the actual cherries.
Okay. When you did the Freud painting, did you also do Freud's Apothecary at the same time? Was that part of the same idea, or has this been a recurring interest?
It was the same. It was all of a piece. The pharmacy.
Pharmacy, right?
Yeah.
Not apothecary.
Well, I like that word too.
You were a Zen priest for how many years?
No years.
No years. Or monk?
Yeah, somewhat of a monk. Yeah.
Did that affect your work?
Well, it eventually became a detriment to my work. I never was attracted to any of the Eastern philosophy and religion to make that my lifetime work. But when I entered a relationship with Bill Kwong, one of Shunryu Suzuki's disciples, he was starting his own retreat. He and the ragtag group of hippies that started up there, you know, they kind of elected me in a leadership position, and more demanding in time. A little sentence from one of Bill's lectures was, you know, some people may look on this as like going to Sunday school or going to church on Sunday, and I thought, yeah, that's more or less the way you know, I mean, I'm really attracted to this philosophy, but I don't want to make it my total life.
And so it started just to compete in terms of time with your art.
Yeah.
And it wasn't feeding your art, like in the sense that, you know, like with Trungpa and Ginsberg and First Thought, Best Thought, and there was a part of that movement was an artistic movement, was mostly through poetry and prose, but also how do you approach fine art or any form of art? And was that in any part of your Zen training?
I hung out a little bit with Tenzin Trungpa, and not so much with Ginsberg. I was around him a little bit. I remember together advertising campaign with posters and programs and stuff for a festival that he put on that was mainly, like you say, poetry and reading, you know. But it was some music too. But I don't remember a visual art component to it.
Right.
Yeah, he was a very exciting character to me.
Except the Trungpa became very influenced by Zen painting, right? So there was that visual aspect, but it didn't segue with the kind of raw energy of the '60s that we were seeing in poetry.
Well, the closest to that I can recall or comes to mind is that at Zen Center they had a visiting Japanese priest named Tada Sensei, and he was a calligrapher. I remember him getting down on the floor with a little roll of paper and then his India ink. He got down and he said, "Okay, no running brush." And he goes, and it's like, there's a different contact with the paper, there's a different everything, a different energy, a different strength in the stroke.
Right.
You know, but, you know, I didn't really get into that kind of art, really.
Right.
I think I did a painting of Snuffy Smith for him with India ink.
Wow.
He thought it was fun.
A lot of your work calls on language. You use language a lot. Is there, as poetry, and you started with Bukowski today, is poetry a part of your work? Do you write poetry, or is it a ongoing inspiration?
Kind of dodging the question or something. I don't know how to answer that. I don't think so. These paintings that are text paintings, it wasn't so much about the subject of the writing. It was about letter forms being a good armature to hold paint. I started one little panel of this multi-panel thing in the upper left-hand corner. I said, yeah, I kind of like that. And then I added the whole thing. This is Proust. And I decided to continue with that. And I tried to pick, mainly from great books, phrases and passages that, not confrontational, not political, but something you could really live with, that if you're going to read it from time to time, you know.
Does any of it come from your time with advertising? What was your background in advertising? You made mention of it earlier.
I'll tell you what part of it comes from advertising is just letter forms. You know, I mean, when I was an ad man in the 60s, I started in the early 60s, and as a designer and an art director, I was always drawing letter forms. The way we did it back then is you really made a drawing of the printed material, you know, and so you had to know those forms.
And did working in advertising affect your work in other ways too? Is it there in your work?
Well, it's there in my books because, you know, whatever design skills I have there in page layout. But for me, you know, it was always driving cab. You know, I went to a lecture of Edward Albee. He was starting out, studying around, and sort of telling his life story. And he said, "Well, at the time, I was driving cab in New York," and then he stopped and he said, "You know, I think many, if not most artists, need to drive a little cab to support their art sometime during their." And so when I was doing my advertising work, that was my version of driving cab.
That's great.
"What are you doing, Pat?" "Oh, I'm driving cab." "I didn't know you drove cab." Yeah, well, it's a metaphor.
That's great. All right, I'm going to ask about these boats that reappear.
The little boat in
The
the
little
drawing.
boat there, and he shows up a fair bit, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Over there.
Uh-huh. So, yeah, tell me about boats.
As a little boy, I was very obsessed with Jane's Fighting Ships. It's a huge coffee table book that I think was an annual that was actually a catalog of the fighting ships of the world. I had some little lead battleships and things like that. I don't know, I just, then there's my good old boys in the boats, you know, Arkansas boys and flat bottom boats, you know.
In flat bottom boats. And there's a lot of overlap between your art and toys too. Like over here, got pieces that are, you know, so clearly art, but they're referencing childhood toys. Is that right?
Yeah, I actually designed a few toys in the 60s, yeah. They were big puppets and a lot like my chess pieces.
Right.
Of that feeling.
What are you working on now?
I'm working on unfinished work, to tell you the truth. That's what this sculpture that I put together, and there were other things that, you know, I even have a billboard over there that I haven't finished. That other wooden boat, the bigger wooden boat, I just put her arm on yesterday, her left arm. It could be finished, but he doesn't have a right arm yet, so I don't know if I'm still working on it or not.
How do you know when something's finished?
That's a good question. It's just when you stop, I think.
What have you not done that you're still longing to do?
Paint my raft of Medusa.
The raft of Medusa?
Paint my raft of Medusa.
Paint your raft.
So right over there on the wall are the dimensions. I think it's 15 by 35. And take all that stuff away. I could paint it right there. Or stretch a canvas or whatever. Paint a big one. It's bigger than Guernica. Raft of Medusa.
Right, great. What's the largest scale you've ever worked on?
The largest scale I ever worked on is 12 high and 50 feet wide. And in my advertising career, I did a lot of bank advertising. That was one of my main clients, was an SNL in Arkansas. He was so supportive. Anyway, even after I moved to California, he'd fly me back just to do some ads or hang out and whatever. One of my best friends. And I floated the idea of an art billboard. And I made a maquette that was about 4 feet wide, mixed media on paper. It was kind of taking Van Gogh's Bridget Arl and faking it to those proportions, faking much more landscape than is in his painting. The sign company racked up all these panels. It was on sheet metal panels, 2 feet by 12 feet, 25 of them obviously. And it was in the shop, it was in the sign shop. And I took my maquette, my sketch, and I put it up on an easel, and I drew a horizon line with a piece of charcoal, and then I started, I painted it with sign painter's paint, bulletin color, outdoor sign paint. It's kind of a glossy enamel. I started painting it with rollers on handles, all that sort of stuff. And then I really loosened up, and I was throwing paint out of buckets, and I could hear the guys in the sign painters and the signmen in there. And then after about a week, I could hear them. The tone had changed. They were saying, "Well, it's pretty okay, you know. It's is shaping up.
That's great.
And so we mounted that on the bridge on the freeway between Little Rock and North Little Rock. And then later, the Arkansas Art Center agreed to put it in front of the Art Center, and they sunk telephone poles and the whole thing, and had it. That was better. It was on eye level, and it was, you know. So that's the largest work so far. That's actually larger than Raft and Medusa.
Right. I'll expect to see the Raft and Medusa next time I come to the studio.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Last question is: what does your art day look like? Like, what's your process? Do you start first thing in the morning? Are you regimented, or are you obsessive? How do you approach working?
Well, I'm definitely not regimented. With those options, obsessive is the best one.
Well, give me another option. Fluid.
Fluid. Well, yeah, okay, fluid. If you're going on the road, remember that one, you know. He's so fluid, you know. I've never been one of these guys that had to loosen up, you know. Maybe tighten up, but not loosen up. So, anyway.
Do you work late into the night? Do you
No.
like it? No.
Never.
You're a daytime.
Yeah, I'm a morning person.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right. Do you work intensely till you're finished, or do you take years do you let things breathe and just sit and wait and then come back to them?
Well, I walk away from it and come back to it, you know. And sometimes I find that, hey, that's better than I thought. Or even that happens with old works. I'll pull something out of a flat file and I'll say, wow, I hated this. I must have had a headache, or I must have been depressed, but it looks pretty good, you know. It's hard.
Yeah.
And then other things that I thought were so great don't look so good, you know. So it takes time.
Yeah.
Here's a painting from the novel by Donna Tartt, the Goldfinch. He laughed. What's to say? Great paintings, people flock to see them. They draw crowds that are reproduced endlessly on coffee mugs and mouse pads and anything you like. And you can have a lifetime of perfectly sincere museum going, where you traipse around enjoying everything and then go out and have some lunch. But if a painting really works down in your heart and changes the way you see, think, and feel, you don't think, oh, I love this picture because it's universal. I love this painting because it speaks to all mankind. No, that's not the reason. Anyone loves a piece of art. It's a secret whisper from an alleyway. Hey, psst, hey, you, hey, kid, yes, you.